Hi, everyone. Lovely to see your faces, folks.
Yes, thanks for coming out in the rain. Really appreciate it.
It's on Halloween Eve, too, so we're going to have some spooky fun. Julia and her gorgeous, eerie, dark book. So it is a huge privilege to be here talking about Night Will Find You. So it was far and away my favorite book of last year when it was published, and I told everyone I possibly could tell when on my book tour, when strangers asked what my favorite book was, I was talking about it, couldn't stop. So it is a really beautiful piece of kismet to be here on the stage talking to you about this book.
Can you be my publicist?
Yes, I'd love to do that. Okay, so Julia, you have a journalism background, but what I was hoping that we could do tonight is actually the opposite of that inverted pyramid that journalists use to write articles. So I want to start really broad, asking you questions about your life as a writer, getting to know you as a thinker and an artist, and then we'll whittle down to Night Will Find You, if that sounds okay.
Sounds great.
Okay. So we are all here right now because we are book lovers. And so I want to ask you, first of all, about your relationship to books. So when did the love affair start? What books were you reading, at a young age? And when did you think to yourself, I want to do this, I want to write?
So I grew up in a small town, Decatur, Texas. You guys might know that small town. And the library was actually started while I was a child there. And my mother was one of the people who helped start the library. And I was very close to the master librarian there. So a lot of my summer afternoons were spent walking back and forth, it was about a mile, back and forth to the library. And my tastes over that time were just, the librarian would help me. There were periods where I was reading classic stuff like Graham Greene or The Pearl or something like that. And then there was a long period where I read only Harlequin romances. And what I have to say about that librarian is she never said, "Why are you reading this?" But I got a great vocabulary out of Harlequin romances, I have to say. So my love affair started very early. And then the other thing to know is that my father and mother had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves with Robert Ludlum and Agatha Christie and Irving Stone. And so when I couldn't go to the library, I could just pick something out of there, which was a great gift. I didn't really think about at the time. And when I was about 15, I'd say, I read Rebecca. And in this dusty small Texas town, I thought, I really want to write a book like this. It just transported me to someplace else, the dark moors. And so for me, it has been a really surreal journey because my book, Black Eyed Susans, I don't know if you've read it, but it did really well in England, better than it did here. And so it was this sort of miraculous, beautiful circle to have the book in the tubes in London in a poster, and having started that little dream in Decatur, Texas, reading on a window seat that my father built me. So
I love that so much. And I have to ask, because libraries were such a big part, we're here because your book, Night Will Find You, was chosen by libraries as the Gulf Coast Reads.
I'm very grateful. If
you
didn't vote for my book, thank you.
Well, I was just going to ask, how does it feel to have that deep well of love reciprocated?
It's an incredible feeling. I would say that it is the best thing about writing a book is getting to know readers and the experts who help me write them. So that's also been a great gift too. But the publishing industry is always there to bring your ego down to earth, no matter how nice readers are.
Okay, I love this, and you have this love of writing, but then, or of reading, dreams of writing something like Rebecca, but then you go into journalism, so not straight into writing books. And I'm so curious to know how your training and your experience as a journalist informs your fiction writing now.
So I feel like I sort of fell, I knew I liked writing, I liked journalism, I sort of fell into the career in a way, and I did it for 20 years, and I really loved it. And it was my husband who told me, at some point you keep talking about writing a novel, and if you don't do it right now, you're never ever going to do it. So it was a scary thing to quit a career that I liked and people that I loved working with. But I did that to 3 years of rejection, very solid rejection. But okay, where am I going?
Oh, just yeah. What about journalism?
Okay, so journalism and fiction writing are two very different things. Fiction writing, you're given this road with no map whatsoever. Whereas with journalism, obviously you're looking for hard facts. And I guess what really served me the best with journalism is the research. I did not have a hesitation to go out and find experts who would talk to me about DNA or date rape or astrophysics. That happened to be my cousin, who is a rocket scientist. But it was a lot of research, and then there is the ability to kind of weave it into the story. That is probably the most difficult part, is taking 7 hours of an interview about something and then realizing it's just informing the authenticity of the book or the character. So that might end up being 4 paragraphs in the book, but it's said with authenticity. And it's very important to me that my books, that layer of research that I add to the mystery plot is accurate.
Have you gotten feedback from scientists or astrophysicists about Night Will Find You and the research? Or
no, thank God. Probably any of you are scientists, don't ask me any questions. But I in this book, I really wanted to explore that gray space between the unknown and science, and I created Vivi as a character who could reflect all that's going on in our world, conspiracy theories and disinformation and all that kind of stuff. And she's basically created, through the voice of the anecdotes of my cousin, the rocket scientist, and a friend of his who's an astrophysicist, who actually have worked for Elon Musk, good or bad. I don't know, they say he's brilliant. But I would ask them questions. I had to speak enough that I could run everything by my astrophysicist cousin. So that really helped. But if you ask me something very deep, I'm going to be honest, I probably couldn't go there. But what it informed largely is the personality and the stereotypes that I had of scientists. I asked my cousin and his friend if they believed in God, and I expected the answer to be no, but the answer from my cousin was yes. Every day I asked myself, how did God make this beautiful thing? And I asked them about aliens, and one of them said, aliens are, what did he say exactly? He said, I don't know why we think aliens are more perfect than we are. They're just as messed up. And then my cousin said, we're looking in the wrong place for aliens because we think aliens should look exactly like us, and talked about the creatures of the deep sea where, we have not explored yet. So.
Now I want you to write a book about aliens so since we're starting to get into Night Will Find You territory, I wonder if we can just take a quick pause and give a brief summary. If you could give us a brief summary of that book, just for anyone who hasn't read it yet, so they can be on the same page with us, and just to jog anyone's memories if it's been a little while.
So, as most of, or all of my books do, it stars a Texas woman who's the protagonist. And she, in this case, she is an astrophysicist, brilliant and young, who also has this reluctant psychic side to her. And she gets mixed up in the case of a missing girl. And the cops who are working with her, one is extremely skeptical of her gifts, and the other is a man she saved as a child using her psychic gift. So what I really wanted to do was explore that gray area between the science and psychic phenomenon, thinking that all of us, that there's not a hard line there, that science could not exist without imagination or be pushed forward without believing in the unknown. So I think they kind of go together more than we think sometimes.
Yeah, I love that, and that spoke to me on a really, really deep level. And I'm pretty sure I went around my book tour last year saying to people, waving my copy, and promising that if people read your book, and I will find you, that they would get a great mystery and thriller, and also maybe discover the secrets of the universe, because it is all there in this book. It's just absolutely
That's a lot.
Okay. Not to put too much, not to fangirl too hard, but I'm so curious. Out of all the genres, I know Rebecca was a big influence for you at a young age, but And I Will Find You is your 6th book and your 6th thriller, your 6th mystery. What is it that keeps drawing you back to crime fiction, to writing about, let's face it, the darker aspects of human life?
I think it is the intellectual puzzle of it, the mind game, the drama that is on the page but doesn't exist in my own life. I was always drawn to crime fiction. As a kid, Presumed Innocent was one of my favorite books. I don't know if you've read that. But
I haven't read it.
But, the other thing is, I always think when I'm writing that I'm supposed to be writing something else. I'm not sure what that is, something better, something more literary, something, and my niece told me, she's a folk singer and an artist, I thought this was very wise. She said, you can only write what you're told to write, what you think you should write. And so that's what comes out. My husband recently showed me an interview with Bob Dylan, and he talked about writing as penetrating magic, because people always ask, how do you write that sentence? And if you thought about it too long, you wouldn't be able to write that sentence. And so I thought that was a very interesting thing to say, and very true. There's no way to describe to anyone how you write a book.
It certainly feels like tapping into something magic, or in that gray area, right? Like something in between intuition and the progressive plot that you need to kind of move forward on.
I think so. I mean, it's in everything. It's like in your dreams. The other night I was kissing Matt LeBlanc and my cat was missing. And, so I told my husband, I don't even know where this dream came from. I don't even like Matt LeBlanc. And he said, well, Jennifer Aniston wasn't in my dream. But dreams. And then I was telling Ashley that my father's 94 and my mother had dementia. And my father has dementia now, and you just kind of have to enter their world. And sometimes I think, what makes my world more real than their world? There was a friend of mine whose mother lived with a little girl ghost who she was really angry at all the time because she wouldn't fold the clothes on the couch, and she always wanted to listen to the Hallmark or watch the Hallmark channel. So, and then I think, well, so that's her reality. So, there's so much gray. I think all of us have experienced something inexplicable in our lives. And we all believe in something that we can't touch, whether it's God or something else. So it's everywhere. It's in photographs even. You're not seeing reality when you look at a photograph, or you're not seeing all the layers.
Yeah. This is so perfectly touching on one of my favorite aspects of this book, which is that to me it is about, thematically about that beautiful blur between the things that we can be certain of and know, whether that's through our senses or through scientific instruments, and the things that we call intuition, or kind of like an itch in the skin or an extrasensory perception. So I kind of want to dive into this a little bit, and I was, sorry, this was so nerdy. I was talking to Julia via email, and I was like, it's the ultimate, epistemological literary suspense. It's about, just for anyone who it's been like a hot minute since Philosophy 101, epistemology is the study of the origin and limits of human knowledge. So
I had to look that up, by the way.
it's like, when you get really too into something or into a book and then you start to like maybe scare the author of said book. But just really this book explores the limits of what we know and how we think we can know things. And Vivi, our main character, is the perfect epitome of that because, as Julia said, she is an astrophysicist and she's also a reluctant psychic. She doesn't want to be a psychic, she doesn't want these gifts and intuitions, but she can't stop having them. And this is something that she shares with her mother. So for me, I think I just absolutely loved this tension between science and intuition. And I think that you were talking about weaving themes throughout your book and how hard it is to do that. But you did it so beautifully here. And there are three things that I want to touch on. And the first is the missing persons case. The missing person case at the heart, at the center of this book. So it was really striking to me that rather than being a serial killer novel or having a pile of bodies that Vivi is being asked to kind of help with, what we have is a case where a little girl has gone missing. There's a void where a girl is supposed to be. And that sort of lack of knowing, I just thought was so thematically resonant with this gray area. So I wonder, were you thinking about that, as you were crafting this book, or was there something else entirely that inspired the missing person case?
Okay, you're gonna not like this answer. I think what happened is I knew I wanted to write about these themes, and I knew there needed to be something for a reader some mystery for a reader to be drawn to something to hope for, something out there that was vulnerable, and it turned into what you said, but it was definitely not planned that way. And the way I write a novel is I sit down with a very tiny idea. And We Are All the Same in the Dark, it was a one-eyed girl blowing a dandelion on the side of the road with a scary town down the road. And I wrote the first 4 or 5 pages and realized I didn't know anything about what it was like to have one eye, and then I started to research into it, and then the book grew from there. And Night Will Find You started with me, with a friend who wanted me to write an Alex Jones-like character into one of my books, and then just poured stories on me, just sent them. She was a journalist friend. But I knew that he could not be the center of this book because he's so dislikable, and I just did not want to spend my year with him. And so, that's kind of how it took shape. But I agree that it turned into like a gift in other ways.
Yeah. Well, that's that penetrating magic part.
Yeah.
Of sitting down and having an idea. Well, I kept thinking about, maybe I watched too much true crime documentaries, which could very well be true, but that consistent thing that you will hear from folks, the particular horror of not knowing what happens to someone you love. And it's that not knowing that is repeated again and again. that struggle just really resonated with me because this book is all about trying to know. So another way that this theme felt just so beautifully resonant to me was, I'm going to actually quote a line from the book. There's this beautiful moment where Vivi is in an abandoned house with a police officer. And she's not too sure about this guy, named Stark, quite yet. And she's feeling pretty uncomfortable. And she thinks to herself, does he know that almost every woman past 16 thinks like this without thinking? That situational awareness is an itchy second skin. That if women like me acted on every defensive thought in our heads, there would be a lot fewer bad men left. First of all, amen. I make a wonderful case for that. But just the way you paint women's situational awareness, women's awareness of danger as being almost an extrasensory perception like Vivi's other skills was just so beautiful to me. And I know that you've said in a past interview that writing about women who have experienced trauma is in the DNA of all of your books. So I wonder if you can talk about that with Night Will Find You.
Yeah, I'd say that it's very important to me that the protagonist in the book be the hero of her story and not the victim. And there was nothing I liked less as a child reading, as an adult reading, is a story where the victim, the female, is used, in a sexually graphic way in a cameo role. And there are a lot of best-selling books that do that. So I really wanted to focus on that. As far as trauma, my feeling is that all of us have some PTSD moment in our lives, had it young, had it when we were older, and that it is a touchstone for me in writing my novels. So maybe I'm doing my own therapy when I'm writing a novel. And I don't really talk about this very much, but this is a small group, right? I'll do it. I'll get through it. But with We Are All the Same in the Dark, a very dear friend of mine who was also my housekeeper. She'd been my friend for over 20 years. And during the period I was writing this novel, it was actually not this novel, it was a different novel. She fell down the stairs, my stairs, and she died. And it was, I would say, one of the worst days of my life, and the following days. And, I kept looking for some kind of closure to this. She ended up, it was a stroke, but of course there's guilt, there's just so many emotions. And she had found my wedding ring that day because I'd lost it. And my last picture of it was of her holding it. And now I still can't wear my wedding ring. But the thing about this is that I realized that I kept looking for clothes. Should we leave the house? Do I not want to be near this staircase? And then I realized when I was around other staircases, I thought of her. And then eventually it became more peaceful, but it has never quite gone away. And I realized that it's not ever going to go away. And that's sort of, I think, something all of us deal with, is that we hope there is this closure at the end of the road, but there's really not. And so, I definitely used We Are All the Same in the Dark, the hardest slog of a book ever, but to get out my feelings. That one in particular, Night Will Find You, is actually more fun to write for me, So.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I can't get the idea of making sure that women, no matter what trauma they've experienced, are the heroes of their stories, of your stories. That's really beautiful to me, and something that I think Vivi struggles with very deeply on the road to being her own hero is really deep self-doubt. And of course, a lot of doubt thrown at her by doubters, like the Alex Jones-esque podcaster. And so, I was thinking about this book as a crisis of faith book, where really the crisis of faith that is at the center of it is Vivi kind of struggling to understand if she should believe herself, like believe her own mind, looking at her mom and thinking, I don't know how to read my mother either. And whether, you were saying about kind of wondering about different realities. So mental illness or even physical illness as a kind of gray area. There's, I think, a line that says, Vivi says, I don't know how to distinguish between the gray area between insanity and intuition, which is like, oh, it's just so perfect.
Don't we all think that?
Yeah,
exactly. A little bit.
So why was exploring this kind of crisis of faith or this journey, this mental journey that Vivi goes through, something that you wanted to do?
I think it's something that I want to do in every book is create a character who is seeking her own redemption.
Yeah.
And the psychic element, I wanted it to be very matter of fact, as matter of fact as the science was, so that maybe people who did not believe in that at all would have some sort of acceptance of it, more so than even she did while they were reading the novel. So.
That is exactly what happened. By the end of the novel, I was like, Vivi, girl, just accept it. You're a psychic. And that's, you can do things.
My grandmother had psychic tendencies. There's a whole,
she?
well, yes, so they say. Yeah, she used to read my cards and she would fold them up when she saw something bad. So
that's so intriguing. I would have to find those folded cards.
but it was not good. I would go to bed thinking, what did she see?
Yeah. The masochist in me would have to know.
But I would say I mean I'm like everyone, well maybe not like everyone else, but you always see something and wonder if, is that butterfly my mother? Because there were butterflies in her yard all the time. I mean, I do have these sort of leanings into what some people would say is, crazy, but
mysticism. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I'm just going to ask 2 more questions because I really want to toss it over to the audience and make sure we have plenty of time for audience Q&A. But one question I have for you, I have my cowboy boots on in theme for this question is, I loved in a previous interview of yours that I listened to, you said that in your books, writing women set in Texas, strong Texas women, that in a way you're trying to kind of like defend Texas against stereotypes that people maybe outside the state might have about it. So I would just love to hear you talk about what you love about Texas that you put into your books.
So I would say Texas is a character in all my books. And, Texas has 30 million people in it. In Houston alone, I think 145 languages are spoken. And yet we are always defined by the extremes of politics, one way, either way, I think. And so I'm constantly defending, I feel like, Texas to other people who don't live here in some way. And to me, the diversity of the state, it's the beauty of its people, how kind they are, the beauty of the landscape, from the intimacy of and darkness of the Pine Curtain to the desert to Galveston to I just, there's brilliance and art here. There are Nobel Prize winners here. There are huge philanthropists here. I mean, you all know these things. You live here. So I feel like that is something that I want to do, is defend Texas. It's funny, this has nothing really to do with this, but my UK editor, when she read what my Black Eyed Susan said, well, how would she have a gun? Because in the UK, I said, well, she would pull it out of a drawer.
I love that. I wrote a book about Louisiana, and my last book, and the first thing my New York City born and bred agent wrote back when she was like, does this really exist? Is it really like that? And I'm like, no, but I mean, like, in some ways, yes, but I've drawn a very fanciful, version of this, but I love that you thought that was a possibility, that, there could be this tiny fictional town. But yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes out there. And this is a complete aside, but I just came back from Big Bend, the Big Bend area, Marathon, Texas, Marfa, and this is, the dark sky, it's a dark sky area, and this is where Vivi has her work, her astrophysicist work. And I just thought how strange and alien and beautiful that part of Texas was. And it was kind of hard for me to reconcile that with Houston. I just thought it was amazing.
I didn't know that it was one of the darkest spots on the planet, and I'm sure many of you do know that. But I actually went to an Airbnb that was on the top of this little mountain, all solar powered, everything that Vivi's place is, and based it on that. And I remember going outside and lying on a blanket, and I had been told you just can't just lie there for a couple of minutes and see the whole sky, that it exposes itself to you over, an hour, and to sit there and keep looking. And I thought, how many things are like that? Everything is like that, right? So, anyway.
My husband and I, we saw, the Milky Way the way that you can, as that flat disk stretching across the sky. And because we're nerds, we went back to our Airbnb and started watching a bunch of YouTube, like tutorials about the Milky Way. And basically all of them are like, this is what we theorize. We think the Milky Way is a disk-like galaxy, but we don't know too much, and this is our best guess. And I was sitting there thinking, like, everything's a gray area. There, it's even science, like you said, is I think there's this line about imagination gives us the tools to dream things up, and then science is what confirms it. So, okay. My very last question for you is just about what's next, what you're working on next.
So I am very behind on a deadline. It's due January 7th, so there will be a book then. But it is about a young girl who is, when she's 10, she finds a bone in a creek and no one can identify the bone for years and years, and it kind of haunts her. And now she is an ER doctor and very much into the science of things, and deals with death daily. And for a reason I can't disclose right now, there's a reason why she goes back to hunting who this bone belongs to. So that's the next book.
I can't wait. Thank you for giving us something to look forward to. And now I want to turn it over for everyone's questions. And I have many sheets more, so don't feel nervous.
Hi, thank you for being here. Try not to boom, sorry.
Like the voice of God.
That's right. It's Halloween.
I'm a big reader of nonfiction. That's all that I ever read. And so when I learned about this book, it was perfect to pick up, and it was a page turner. Absolutely loved it. And I was captivated by it, pulled in. It's not so much about the plot or anything, but you read about younger people not reading quite the same way. That, there's been some articles out there about college students who show up and they hadn't read many books, in high school or anything. What do you sense that going on? Do you think young people are still drawn to fiction? Any hope you can give us that we can keep tantalizing young people with fiction?
Well, librarians are hope always. One of the things I think is that commercial fiction has, it's not on reading list so much in the high schools, but it has maybe the greatest opportunity to pull kids into reading, that they're not reading something that excites them. And as soon as they read something that excites them, they move on. So I remember, looking at my son reading the book as I lay dying, and he looked like he was dying, I mean, after a different class, he drew a mustache on Charlotte Bronte. I don't know, but he is now a doctor and a huge reader of nonfiction and fiction, and he reads really tough books like Invisible Man. And so I think don't give up, because I don't think you know when someone is going to fall in love with reading. I think most of us in this room probably fell in love at an early age because we didn't have all the, not the very young, but people like me didn't have all the distractions of the telephone and the internet and all of that, and so they were forced to turn to this kind of, solo entertainment. But I do have hope. I think, I don't know if that really answered your question, but I mean, and the nonfiction aspect, I really like nonfiction too, and I really like literary fiction too. And so all those things I think have kind of turned me into who I am. So.
I would just add that I'm a very business attuned girly in publishing and read all of the publishing industry newsletters. And I mean, everything that shows, there's a lot of evidence that says sales data for books is kind of just going up and up and up. So that gives me a lot of hope. I love social media phenomenons like the book talk taking off. But yeah, there's so many competing forms of entertainment but I have a lot of faith that books are forever.
Yeah, me too.
Hi, thank you for being here. As someone who tends to fall asleep to true crime like Forensic Files, were there any particular true crime cases that inspired the missing person case in your book?
That is a really good question, and I would say probably no, but it's probably the nature of me also being fascinated with true crime and, watching so much of it. So, but I don't think there is a specific case. I mean, there were, just in general about my novels, I was always interested in what happens to victims long after the fact that something terrible happens. Like, I remember we worked on a story at the Star-Telegram about a man who walked into his house and shot up almost his whole family. And there were only 2 kids who survived. And he was shot by the police and was in a wheelchair in prison all his life. And so we went back to those kids who were no longer kids, who had families of their own, who were still wrestling with whether to go, see their father still in prison. So, if anything, I'd say that is more true, that I think about that, and not necessarily whatever happens in my novels tends to just happen. I can't really explain it. It's just I write one word and the characters drive the plot, and that's the way it goes.
So, in terms of writing style, you use a lot of metaphors, and it made me think that probably as a journalist you couldn't use them as often, and maybe you just save them up being a novelist, and you can pour your words onto the page. But anyway, you can comment on that.
Oh, every one of those is hard to write. So I guess I don't want my writing to be like anyone else's. I want it to not be cliche. So when I come up with something cliche, I reach harder, and it can take a very long time. It can take an hour to write one of those sometimes. But I want it to feel fresh to you, and I want a writing style that is easy to read but feels slightly literary. That you're able to consume easily, and yet there's a little bit, pretty about it as you move along. So, but yeah, journalism, there was some really good narrative writing when I was a journalist, but it's not the same. It's not the same.
I would just add, I had the honor of talking to S.A. Cosby, Sean Cosby, about his writing, which is also very full of metaphor. And he says that that's a kind of Southern ism, to kind of speak and relate in metaphor. And I really feel like a student with a thesis here, but a metaphor that beautiful, like this, a thing being like, or as, something else is like a thing in translation, or something descriptive but not quite pinned down. And I feel like that's just thematically and kind of what you do with your writing.
I think that's true, and then I think he's very good at it. If you haven't read his books, you should. But some of the best poets are ones I grew up with, and they were men who were pretty silent until they had something to say, and then they said it so creatively. And now I listen very closely to what people say in Texas. They're good with metaphors, and I'll say, I'm writing that down. Is it okay if I use that in a future novel? Or something like it. So.
I like that you asked permission too. It's been said, it's mine.
Yes.
One more.
Sure.
For both of you, I guess. Where do you write? Do you have like a specific place that I'll probably end up writing some nonfiction, but I can never quite find the right place to sit or I always feel like something needs to be fresh. Do you have advice on kind of settings? Do you always sit at the same place? Do you move around a lot?
I know you're a writer because that's exactly how I feel. My brain will come up with like a little reason why something's off, where I need to change it. Which is why my answer is very weird in that I sit in the exact same place, in the exact same position, which is really bad for my back, which is why I now walk like this, hunched over my laptop, and that will last me for about a year. I can usually get one book out of that position, and then the magic ends, and I have to go somewhere else in my house, which then becomes my territory where my husband can make no sound, no matter if it's like right in front of the television or in our bedroom or what have you. It's now mine. And then I just kind of go from there and until the whole house is my domain.
Interesting. I think it's different for every writer. I think that I knew I was really a writer when I was writing on deadline in a urologist's office. So, but I wrote most of my books at the kitchen table. I didn't have an office, and so about 2 years ago we redid our house, and I now have an office, and the kitchen table is very old, and my husband was so excited to get rid of it, and I said, I don't know if I can write without the kitchen table. So the kitchen table sat in the new office for a while until I could let it go. But I think the most important thing about writing is not where you write, because when you're writing, you're engrossed. Now, this is not true for her. That may not be true for you either. But for me, it's I have to be engrossed in what I'm doing, and then it doesn't really matter so much. And the best advice anybody ever gave me about writing was you need to sit down, and I'm sure you do this too, is like you need to get so many words or so many pages before you can get up out of the chair. So, don't give yourself excuses. Sometimes it will take me 10 hours to get to that point, and sometimes it will take me 2. So, and sometimes the best writing comes out of having been in that chair for 10 hours. So.
I've moved to doing writing sprints because TikTok has done terrible things to my brain, and now I feel like I'll do 25-minute sprints where I put my phone away and I write for 25 minutes without doing anything else. And I just constantly have to leash myself to the writing. It works.
I have a question, 2 questions actually. What are your thoughts on the current state of journalism? Do you believe it's a dying profession?
I think journalism is a mess. It makes me sad every day. I will say that, there used to be journalists who really cared. I mean, they might not always be right or accurate, and, perception always comes into it, but they really tried and they really cared about the truth. And now it's just, to me, it's just a disaster. And then you look at the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times. I mean, the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post refused to endorse anybody for president. That kind of control thing is kind of concerning to me. And then the New York Times, I think, has a lot of bias in its writing so it's just, I'm very sad about it, is what I'll say. So, how do you feel?
I feel the same. I'm from New York, so New York Times will always be the venerable number one.
Right, it's the place, right, to go now. It is journalism now, yeah.
So my second question is about the book itself. Was it by design that you included 3 sets of triangles, meaning the mother, the two daughters of Mike, and then Vivi, Sharp, and Mike?
That's interesting. I never even thought about that. But I'm sure there's somewhere in that gray area, and that's really beautiful. I'm going to use it today. But I mean, I think that I like a lot of complexity in relationships. That part I can say is true. That I just don't think, for all of us, our relationships are not easy, even with the people we love the most. And people we love the most can betray us, and people we don't think will come to our defense do. So I would say that's in the right, but I never thought of that.
I'm 2/3 of the way through. It's an amazing book. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Well, that inspired my reread. I can't wait to look for those triangles. That reminds me, I was at an event with Stuart Turton. I don't know, Carrie, if you were there for his last one. And someone, the brilliant reader, asked him, wow, what is up with all the Catholic imagery just throughout this entire book? And he was like, it's there. He was like, well, I did go to Catholic school. And I was like, I guess I better do some thinking about what's coming through, in this book. But like that magic, tapping into something is like tapping into the
Matt LeBlanc magic.
I'll always think of it that way. All right, any more questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, a question on how you think writing through the book chronologically. Do you go from start to finish, or you can come up with a great ending and work your way back? Just how do you start and then finish?
Yeah, very straightforward. I do it chronologically. So I won't write a book until I know the ending and know the several pivotal scenes that are just like calling to me emotionally, that I'm envisioning in the shower and before I go to sleep. Like those scenes are the reason I'm drawn to write the book. But I force myself to then write chronologically, and it helps because I'm so excited to get to those pivotal scenes that I think it helps me pass over, like unnecessary detail about, and then she went to lunch, and no one cares about that. I don't care about that. Let's get to the good stuff. But I do force myself to write chronologically.
So I'm the opposite. I don't know the ending at all before I start. I might not even know until I'm 3/4 of the way through, what I'm going to do. But I do write chronologically, and I think I do that, well, because the characters are driving me, telling me where we're going, and then also because of the pace. I think it helps me, maybe you two, just kind of like keep the pace going. That can be one of the biggest struggles of a book, and the ending is the most important part of a book. I think you would agree. So I should probably think of my endings first. But if the ending is bad, you know what that is. You don't like the entire book. It's all over. The rest of the book could have been perfect.
Yes. My last book had a very controversial ending, so I witnessed that play out for Paris in real time. No, I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, you really do practice magic, Julie, when you write, just not knowing the ending and letting your characters drive.
Or it's very foolish. I don't know.
It's working beautifully.
I have 2 questions. First one is, do you use a software to write your books?
I just use Microsoft Word.
Actually,
Good old word.
There's all kinds of options, and this is just this just works. It just works.
I mean, I'm very jealous of writers who they'll take little screenshots of their laptop and they've got these fancy programs with all these, chapter headings. I don't know, is that Scrivener? Am I just describing Scrivener? I don't know.
But no, it's just like that blank word doc. That's it.
Scrivener does help keep it in order.
Yeah.
The other question is about Gulf Coast Reads. So how do the books come to the attention of the committee? Does somebody nominate them, or is it?
Yeah, so we'll start meeting again next month. And everybody on the committee just kind of, informed by their ideas or book lists, comes in with like a really big list. And then we start discussing them, and we kind of have a rubric that we, is it broad interest and the different things on the rubric, and then we narrow down until we have 3 titles, and that's when we put those 3 up for public vote. So we meet all through the year, and the public vote happens mid-year.
Right.
So,
Okay. Right, but then we have to wait until very
Yeah.
end.
yeah.
But this thing is very.
We used to, the public vote just started 3 years ago. We used to just pick.
Oh, okay. I read all 3, and I was very happy.
That's awesome.
Thank you. All right, last call for a question. We'll get to signing.
I'll ask a question really
Oh,
quick,
okay.
just to end it, I guess. Is there a recent book from both of you that you guys are obsessed with that you would like recommend for us to read? Just a general recommendation.
Okay, this is gonna be like my honest truth. I don't know if it's because it's Halloween week, but I've been craving fantasy and magic. And I discovered the Kate Daniels series, if anyone's familiar. I'm seeing no blank looks everywhere. If you like urban fantasy, female-centered urban fantasy, it is a 10-book series. I'm on book 4. I cannot read these fast enough. They're written, but the author is Alana Andrews, but it's actually a husband and wife, which blows my mind that they could write together. There was a murder in real life. But yeah, they're absolutely fantastic. And it's about a almost like post-apocalyptic Atlanta where like ancient magic that used to exist in the world has come back with a vengeance. And so it's fabulous.
Okay, on my list. Yeah. Okay, so this will be a strange recommendation, but I reread Silence of the Lambs, and I'm sure many of you have read that book, but the reread of it was absolutely fascinating. And I analyzed it as a writer and didn't realize at the time that I first read it, that it's primarily dialogue. I mean, a huge portion of it is dialogue. So it is a brilliant book from a writer's perspective. You go back and you read something and you think, oh, I know the ending. Doesn't matter that you know the ending to this novel. I would just, it's Halloween. I would recommend that reading. It's one of the books that made me shiver while children were laughing down the street, and it still did. Yeah.
Perfectly themed. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you all.